Well, I hope everyone's doing well. Had a good week. I know it's cold outside. I was listening to Neil talk about I guess the various companies fighting over the copyright of the vaccination. And I should have recorded it, but I didn't. But I had one of my clients called in yesterday, and they live up in North Alabama, kind of out in the woods, and they're I don't know how you would say this, big, Trump supporters, conservatives, what have you. And they were calling me, and they're a younger couple, and big hunters, and just your rugged type people, And they called me to add something to their auto policy, and I told my CSR, I said, "Come here for a second." I had muted it. I said, "I'm about to play a joke on them," and so I unmuted it, and I said, "Yeah, we can get that change taken care of." I said, "Hey, we're going to need you to email us a picture of your vaccination card." And they said, "Do what?" And I said, I can add this golf cart and the Polaris. I said, "But going forward, we got to see your vaccination card to do that." And man, let me tell you, hey, I started hearing some crazy stuff. And I said, hey, Brian. And he goes, "Oh," I said, "I'm just playing with you." He goes, "Man." He's like, so anyway, I should have recorded it. Man, he was like, "Well, let me tell you something." It's like, okay. So anyway, I thought that was funny. Man, he was like, "I'm going to call your buddy and tell him," because I've got a friend of mine that referred him to me. But anyway, I wanted to start off. I've got just a little short time up here today before I think Neil comes up, and I recently saw an advertisement for a device that you can use to track things. It's called the Apple AirTag. I don't know if y'all have heard of it or seen it. And there's probably various different devices out there that are different brand names, but this device can be used for many things. And here's a few scenarios. Some people will buy them, ladies. They'll drop them one in their purse, and you won't have to hear anyone, a lady saying, "I can't find my purse," because it allows you to track various things. I know, not picking on him, but a few weeks back, Mr. Level talked to us about he always loses his water bottle. Now you can't drop one of these in a water bottle, but you could definitely put it in a purse. Some people put it in their kid's lunch box or their kid's backpack, kind of wanting to make sure that they can always see where their child is if their child were to be kidnapped or something. And there's been other things where people put them in the kid's shoe or something. So it's this new technology that they've got out. But regardless, there's many different brands. I'm not trying to push the AirTag or it at all. Now, if you have a smartphone, which most people do, if you have an iPhone, you have the Find My iPhone thing where you can, if you lose your phone, you can track down where your phone is if you've got that turned on. If you don't have an iPhone, there's this other tracking device that a lot of parents like to use called Life 360. And it's where they can keep up with everybody, parents can keep up with their kids, wives can keep up with their husbands, and all that kind of stuff at Life 360. Now, who in here has ever forgotten a password? Right? Well, used to, if you forgot a password, it was just, man, they've made it a lot easier nowadays. When you forget a password, as long as you've got an email or your phone, they'll text you and you can hit a link. And I mean, you can change your password just like that, unless you're talking about Bitcoin. And from what I understand with Bitcoin, and I'm not a Bitcoin person, but if you lose your password with that, it don't matter how much money you had, it's gone. Have y'all heard that? It's pretty scary. So if you're doing Bitcoin, don't lose your password. But what am I getting at? Why am I bringing this up? Well, let's turn over to Psalms chapter 78. And this forgetting of passwords, losing your purse, losing your phone, losing your water bottle. right? All these types of things. But Psalms chapter 78, and I thought we would start reading in verse 39. We're going to read a few scriptures here. It says, "For he remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passes away and does not come again. How often did they provoke him in the wilderness and grieve him in the desert? And still again, they tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his hand, nor the day when he delivered them from the enemy." Now, some things never change. Just like ancient Israel, we are still today a very forgetful people. You think about it, we can't even keep up with a purse. We can't even, keep up with our phone, which some people say your phone is your best friend now, And think about that, forgetful. And when we look here in Psalms, this problem with remembering things or being forgetful. Now, in the King James Version, I looked this up, and I know there's different versions, but I looked up the King James Version. The word remember is listed 148 times. And if you start pulling up different versions of the word remember, like remembered, it even gets more. But just the word remember, it's 148 times. Let's go over to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. And read a few scriptures here, starting in verse 1. And, this is very familiar. Israel's come out of the land of Egypt, and they're about to be given what we call today the 10 Commandments. And God begins to speak, and it says, "And God spoke all these words, saying," in verse 2, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath it, or that is in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow yourself down to them, nor serve them, for I am the Lord your God, and I'm a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God, and in it you shall not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your maidservant, nor your manservant, nor your livestock, nor the stranger within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it." Number 12, or verse 12. "Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor manservant, nor maidservant, nor his ox, or his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's." And we see these 10 commandments that Moses came down with on the two tables, or the two tablets, excuse me. And we have these 10 commandments being given to Moses. And if we take a look at something, and this is something I'm sure you've all heard before, look at the fourth one. Because when we start going down in verse 13, it says, "You shall not, you shall not." But when it comes to that fourth commandment, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day." The other ones, it doesn't say, "Hey, remember not to murder people. Remember not to commit adultery." It just says, don't do it. But for some unique reason, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day." Many call the Sabbath the the great test commandment, okay? And it's definitely a test commandment. But the thing is, you can't fall into that trap. They're all test commandments. They're all test commandments. But, you know, the word remember to me implies that something may happen with this one. In other words, this is one that you need to remember. In other words, this is one that throughout your life, throughout your generation, you're probably going to be tempted to break it. And that's why some say it's the great test commandment. And when you think of that word remember, it implies you could forget this, you might overlook it. Don't forget it. Don't stop doing it. Don't start breaking it. Remember it. Remember. You know, today, like I said at the beginning, and I'm kind of making a joke of this, but today we can't keep up with our purses. We can't keep up with our phones. We can't even sometimes keep up with where we parked our car, right? We were talking about that, you know, last week. I know me and Mr. Bartleson were talking about that. We were talking about times we've gone into a store, we come out, we're trying to remember where we parked. And then on some instances, coming out, you're walking around, you're looking, you can't find your car. And the reason why you can't find your car is not because you can't remember where you parked it. It's because you can't remember which car you took. So we have problems sometimes with remembering things, right? We have problems with that. And of course, as we get older, they say that gets worse, but it doesn't always have to be an age thing, okay? It doesn't always have to be an age thing. But what we're trying to really, you know, when I mention those various things, those are physical things. But what we're talking about, remember, is so much bigger than that. Because we're talking about our salvation. We're talking about remembering things of importance, such as the Sabbath, right? So I put together a few points that I thought that we could talk about today. And the first point I put down that I want you to write down, or if you take notes, is we don't need to forget, and don't get offended, because I'm saying we're, but you're not that smart. We're not that smart, okay? We're really not. And let's go over to Proverbs chapter 3 and read a few scriptures. Proverbs chapter 3. In Proverbs chapter 3, we're just going to read verse 5, and this is scripture you've read many times. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. That's why I started off by saying, you, me, we're not that smart. We're really not. This is a huge temptation today because guess what? We all think we are pretty smart. We fall into that trap pretty quick. You know, you get a telemarketer call you or somebody send you an email about some money they've got in Africa or something, and they're just needing you to help them, and they'll give you 25%. You and me, hopefully, we shoot that down pretty quick. And we think, can you believe there's people out there that fall for that? Right? And we begin to think we're pretty smart, right? And, you know, there's various scenarios, but we really aren't. Something that we need to remember is that you and I have been blessed with some of God's truths. And we aren't careful, we'll fall into a trap of thinking that we figured them out on our own. We'll fall into a trap of thinking, I don't know why they don't see the Sabbath. I see it. It's clear as day. It's right there in the scripture, right? And we can fall into that trap of thinking that by our own might, by our own, you know, education, that we figured this out. And we don't need to fall into that trap. And if we do fall into that trap, that's right where Satan wants us. God chose to show you his Sabbath and his ways. We didn't discover them. And I want you to think about this. God left for you and I and those that went before us, at one point or another in their life and ongoing through their life, he has left us spiritual breadcrumbs. That's what he's done. He's taken spiritual breadcrumbs and he's thrown them over there, thrown them over here, so that we go, huh, what is this? And we pick it up. And we follow that breadcrumb trail. And our eyes begin to be open to various things that he is showing us. And each one of us are at different stages on that trail. Foolishly, sometimes, the trail's leading this way. We pick the breadcrumb up, we eat it, and then we walk over that way. Right? Once again, we're not that smart. But God has chosen to lead us down these trails. So we have to force ourselves to stop making quick decisions. Decisions that we don't take time to consult with God first about. And that's what this verse in Proverbs talks to us about. Not leaning on our own understanding. You know, to some degree, we need to become like successful businessmen. And let me kind of paint that picture for you, what I mean there. You know, a lot of successful businessmen are confronted with various, hey, will you do this? Will you do this? Let's do this. Let's do this. And you always see in the movies or what have you, they say, well, I tell you what, get with my attorneys, get with my accountant, let them take a look at it, and we'll get back to you. In other words, very rarely does that businessman go, what? We're going to do this. No, they've typically surrounded themselves with attorneys and accountants. Now, sometimes that's not such a good thing, as we know, but it's that same concept of not being quick to make a decision and not making a decision on the fly, so to speak. Think about it. We have the supreme God, the creator of all the universe. Every one of us in this room do. We have the supreme being who made you and I, who made these commandments, who wrote this Bible, who is the reason why life exists. You and I have him on retainer. Do you know what a retainer is? We have him on retainer. We have him as our counsel. But yet, do we always use him? He's there, he's ready, right? So we have to begin to do this if we're not already. And that's a question that each and every one of us have to answer on our own. And obviously, I would feel that the correct answer would be we could all be doing better at this, right? When decisions come up and we've got to make decisions, whatever they may be, we need to seek God more. Now, obviously, you need to be careful with that. I mean, you know, we're not talking about some matters, you know, such as, you know, do I want this hamburger or that hamburger? I'm talking about serious matters here, but we need to seek God's advice. Let's think about that. We have the supreme being of the universe on retainer. The next thing I wrote this down. Follow God's advice. Remember what I talked about where he puts these spiritual breadcrumbs out for us. Sometimes we pick them up and then we don't keep following. We go the wrong way, you know, and we don't follow the way in which they're leading us. And we've all been guilty of that. And, you know, we've got to do a better job with that, but we need to follow God's advice. And without turning over, just reading the next verse in verse 6, still in Proverbs chapter 3. In verse 6, it says, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. So if we acknowledge God, if we don't lean on our understanding, and we go to him for advice and for direction, he'll show us. And what we see here in verse 6 is, if we allow him to direct our paths, right, you know, we'll be blessed for that. Now, we can't go to God and say, show me the way. What do I need to do here? What do I need to be doing? And then God shows us and then we ignore it, that is not a good situation to be in. That's the same situation if we were parents and our child came to us for advice, we gave it to them and they ignored it, or a co-worker or what have you. It can be very frustrating. Now, God's a merciful God, but we definitely don't want to be frustrating him. So, think of all the errors that we've made in our lives. If we sat down, you don't want to focus too long on them because it can be depressing, but what if God had been directing you in those various times of your life where you made bad decisions? How might your life be different today? It's great that you're here. It's great that you're keeping the Sabbath, but maybe you would have began keeping the Sabbath sooner. Maybe something else would have happened differently in your life. Think about that. Now, we have this famous saying that we say, hindsight's 20/20, right? And hindsight is 20/20. We can look back and we can say, yeah, if I would have looked at this differently. But, think about it. God's sight is better than 20/20. God's sight is better than 20/20. He doesn't have to make a mistake to get 20/20. He knows the right way from the beginning. And if we follow the ways in which he directs our paths, then we can expect to have a better life on this earth. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not going to go through struggles and temptations. That is the life in which we're trying to live. We're going to have those things. We're going to have those things. But God will be providing us a protection if we're following him. And we look here, things are going to get harder. We know that. And things have probably gotten harder over the last few years, but they're going to continue to get harder. And why is that? It's because Satan is relentless. He doesn't give up. He doesn't stop. And, you think about, I was watching something yesterday and it made sense. And this comedian was talking about, how there's an act that's out in Las Vegas where they're doing all this stuff with tigers. And one of the tigers attacked the guy. And he said, everybody was saying that tiger went crazy. He said, that tiger didn't go crazy. That tiger went tiger. He said, the tiger was crazy when you had him riding around in a little golf cart. Okay. When the tiger attacks you, that's what a tiger's supposed to do. And we think about Satan, he is a roaring lion. And if he's not making your life and my life, a living hell, then he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing, right? Because that's what his MO is. We don't want it to be that way, but he chose that. And he is the enemy of God. And if we're with God, he's enemy to us. Which brings up the next thing. We have to resist evil. So we got to stop leaning on our own understanding. We got to allow God to direct our paths. And then this third one I put down here is resist evil. Let's go over to 1 John. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 14. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 14. It says, I wrote to you, fathers, because you have known him who is from the beginning. I wrote to you, young men, because you are strong, and the word of God is dwelling in you, and you have overcome the wicked one. Do not love the world, nor the things that are in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Because everything that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pretentious pride of physical life, is not from the Father, but it's from the world. And the world and its lust is passing away, but the one who does the will of God abides forever. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, is if we're going to God and asking him to direct our paths, then we're doing the will of God. If we're following the direction in which he gives us, if we're seeking him. And then we look here, we've got to resist evil. And what is evil? Well, the love of the world. That's one of Satan's traps that he uses on you and I. And believe me, the world since the beginning of time has become much more luxury than it ever has before. The things that used to occupy a person's time no longer occupies their time. You think about that. Thousands of years ago, a man had to set a certain amount of time to cut wood because they had to have firewood to keep the house warm. He had to go hunting to get food, right? They didn't have a washing machine, so typically, and this might be stereotypical or whatever, but the woman would have to clean clothes and prepare meals. All of these things have been eliminated with machines, with luxuries. Now, if your house is cold, you turn the temperature up. If you want something to eat, you can go through a drive-through. You can pop it in a microwave. All of this frees up time for what? For us to love the world, to be more caught up in its various contraptions, which, not saying that phones are bad things, because a lot of good things come out of them, but a lot of people, they do. The lust of the world, you think about it. The lust of the flesh of the eyes. Think about, I want this. My dad would always say that and say, I want this. Say, do you really? You say, I need this. Do you really need that? Do you really need it? Or are you just saying you need it? You think about the pride of life, and this is something that we have to watch ourselves for. Son, the father's sitting there and he says, son, I've worked X amount of years. I've got this many acres. This house is paid for. I've got this much money in the bank. I've got this much money in my 401k. I've worked all these years. Look what I've built. That's that pride of life. You have to be careful with that, because that is where Satan gets us. Not that we should boast, but our lives should be measured by the knowledge God has shown us and the wonderful memories that we have compiled that make us who we are. The various experiences, the things in which we learn, the times we're able to help people, the times we're there for people, those are the things that we should cherish. Those should be our riches. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not supposed to try to save money. That's not what I'm getting at either. Doesn't mean that we're not supposed to try to, have some of the nicer things in life. But the point is don't get the perspective messed up, because you know what? Even though the Egyptians tried to do it, you can't take it with you. They literally would bury their servants with them, so they would need them in the afterlife. They would bury their money with them. And you can't take it with you, even if you bury it. We can go from scenario after scenario, but the point is we have to make sure that we don't fall into this trap of that loving of the world. And I want you to think of it, because what it is it's us buying into this fact of chasing the cheese. And if you're chasing the cheese, you forget that the cheese is a mousetrap, right? You forget about it. Over the years, I remember hearing sermons about people that were in the military or various jobs, had been in these jobs for years, and they come to the understanding of the Sabbath, and they would tell their employer, hey, I can't work on the Sabbath anymore. And there were people that I've heard about in sermons, never personally met them, but there were people that you would hear about that lost their jobs, gave up an opportunity for a full retirement or a pension because they had found this pearl of great price, right? We have to make sure that that's the type of person that we are. that God comes first. And it's a lot easier said than done. And the fourth one I've got down here is when we fail. Because we will fail. And we already have failed. We know that. It's something that we all come to understand, is that none of us in this room are perfect. We're all sinners. And even though we may take the Passover, we will sin again. Hopefully, we're limiting those things, right? But we know that's why Christ came and died for us. Let's go back to the book of Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 3 again. This time we're going to read verse 11. When we fail, that's what I wrote down. And in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 11, it says, "My son, do not despise the chastising of the Lord, nor be weary of his correction." When God shows you and I things that we need to change, we should be thankful that he cares enough to show us. You know, you've thought about this in your life. There's been times in your life where you were angry with someone and you wanted them to know it because you wanted to get it behind you. In other words, you wanted them to ask for your forgiveness. You wanted y'all to shake or hug or whatever because you cared about that person, but you had to let them know they had done you wrong. It's not until a person says they've been done wrong that they never want to talk to that person again. That's completely different. Because then that person has said, I don't care. I'm not going to forgive them. I don't want nothing else to do with them. And so when we read this verse here in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 11, we should understand that when God corrects us, that's better than him ignoring us. That's better than him turning his back on us and saying, I'm done. Live your life how you want. So we actually, you know, when we're corrected, when God shows us things in our lives that we need to change, we need to be thankful for that. Now, we want to pray to God for him to show us in mercy. You know, we don't want him to beat us down. And the way we do that is we've got to have a good attitude. But one of the main things we talked about, or we'll soon start talking about as we're starting to get closer to Passover and Days of Unleavened Bread, is we'll start talking about what? Examining ourselves. For you and I, this shouldn't just be something we do around Passover and Days of Unleavened Bread. Examining ourselves should be a daily thing. But here's the thing. Once we do it, do we act on it? You know, we don't want to be like that homeowner. Let me give you an example. You know, I get these inspection reports all the time because people are about to buy a new home. And they'll say, you know, I'm buying this home. Oh, it's a beautiful home. Yeah, it's a beautiful home. Now, the homeowner told us about there's one part of the house where the roof leaks. And the toilet bowl downstairs leaks. And there's some tiles that are loose on the kitchen floor. In other words, the homeowner, in full disclosure, tells the potential buyer, hey, look, we want to sell the house, but we want to point out some of the problems. And that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. We don't want to be like that homeowner. When we examine ourselves, we don't do that just so we can know the problems and not fix them. We don't want to say, hey, look, yeah, I got a leaky roof on my temple. Okay. I've got a faucet that runs. And we got to be fixing those things, whatever they are. So it's not enough to just examine ourselves. We've got to examine ourselves and then begin the process of trying to correct it, whatever it might be. You know, it does us no good to know what needs to be fixing. we need to also be the one fixing. And a lot of that has to do with us going to God in prayer, of course. It's not that we can fix everything. And you might run into some things that aren't easily fixed or take a longer time to fix, or you might have to actually get other people involved, right? An example of that would be if you had done a wrong to someone, maybe that's not just something you can say, well, please forgive me. No, you might need to go to that person and make that right. It's part of that, the process of examining ourselves. Let's go over to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 1, read, I exhort you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God, which is your spiritual service. Do not conform yourselves to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind in order that you may prove that is well-pleasing and good, the perfect will of God. And in verse 3, for I say through the grace that was given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to. We started off with that. You're not that smart. But to think with a sound mindedness, as God has divided to each one a measure of faith. When God shows us our errors in our lives, we might not be able to fix them all immediately, but we definitely should be moving towards correcting them, in that process. Some things do take time. And if you've got a list of handyman sort of things that you need to get knocked off, you don't start on all of them at the same time, maybe. Maybe you knock this one out, then you move to this one. Now, there might be some that you can knock two birds out with one stone, so to speak. But it's that part of examining ourselves. And for a final scripture, let's go over to 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians in chapter 4 and verse 16. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 16, it says, for this reason we do not lose heart. But if our outward man is being brought to decay, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For the momentary likeness of our tribulation is working out for us an immeasurable, greater, and everlasting fullness of glory, while we consider not the things that are seen, but the things that are not seen. For the things that are seen are temporary, but the things that are not seen are eternal. That's what we're doing. Yesterday was my father's birthday, and I know my sister, myself, and I think my brother, at some point during the day, we went by the cemetery. And, we're temporary. We are temporary. And God has placed an opportunity for eternity in a temporary body. That's what he's done. He's placed this little seed of an opportunity for us to live for eternity, and he placed it in a temporary dwelling. And as we get older, we notice it more and more and more. And, we start realizing, how many more years do I have? Do I have years? Do I have months? And, you go to a cemetery and it's just quiet, because there comes a time where all of us will be silenced, where we can't go to God in prayer anymore. We can't go to God and praise his name and thank him for all the wonderful things we've done for him, because our time has ended. So we have to make sure that we do that while we're alive. And, because we're in this temporary body, because we are forgetful. I started off with that, remember? Because we are forgetful, and God knows this, but he is willing to show us mercy if we remember him. And here's the part. If we remember him, and if we remember what we were called to do, and not just what we were called to do, but why we were called to do it. We can't lose sight of that, because you've got everything to lose, and that being to live for eternity versus this being your time. So hopefully this is an encouraging message of just helping us to remember that we are forgetful people. Some of that's normal, but when it comes to God's ways and his word, we need to make sure that we're not falling into those same traps that Israel fell into. The scripture gives us that ability to say, hindsight's 2020. We can look at the mistakes of others, right? We need to try to look at things through God's eyes, which is obviously more, or excuse me, better than 2020.